Just want to see if it's working. See if it's working. All right. Sounds good. Just want to see if it's... See if it's working. All right. Sounds good. All right. Hello, everyone. To the first live stream that I'm doing, and I'm just... This is more of a trial run more than anything, and seeing how it all goes and see if I actually pull in more people, because I'm still trying to get a foothold of how I want to be doing content on this channel. So today, I will just be starting on High Priest by Timothy Leary. Now, I've never personally read this book, so this is actually going to be a bit of a different kind of experience for me. And I just want to be reading it out aloud because I've decided I kind of maybe want to be getting on here and reading out aloud, because I tend to talk to myself a lot and imagine myself in conversations and things like that when no one's around. And I thought, I'll just read it out aloud and tell you my thoughts and see what I think. So this is obviously the original acknowledgements here. I'm not going to bore you with that. I'll just sort of go into the more juicy parts. So as you can see in the beginning, there's basically original High Priest bands. It's obviously referring to ones that, because from Illuminostic, he basically talked about this book and sort of saw, and apparently Timothy Leary saw all these modern bands that you see here as the high priests of the modern age. And they kind of are, because musician is very close to magician and so on and so forth. Nice, cute image of Aldous Huxley right there as well. All right. Okay, 1995 acknowledgements. We transmit the 1995 reissue of High Priest with a certain amused, confused, apologetic wonder. This collection of neuro-adventure stories was first published in 1968 by Word Publishing NAL. It was reissued, reanimated in 1995 by Ronin Publishing. I am grateful for the visionary friendship of Beverly Potter and Sebastian Orfali and the graphic prowess of Howard Hayles. The acknowledgements for the ancient 1968 version declaimed, the psychedelic revolution is a religious renaissance of the young, for the young, by the young. Kind of makes sense, because you don't really hear about old farts getting into it unless they really want to stick with it. Because most people just say, because most of the old people that I talk to, they all say, I only did it in my 20s, and then they just sort of forgot what they were doing and then went back to their normal lives, I suppose. So yeah, this is going to be a good one. Thus, 27 years ago, did we pompously, parentally announce the birth of the baby boomers. So pass out the loaded cigars. Here's more 68 pulpit parenting sermonizing. All right. The authentic priests, the real prophets of this great movement, are the rock and roll musicians. There you go. For the first time in history, teenagers, our new advanced mutant species, has written their own songs, beat their own rhythm, created their own religion. It's obviously referring to the Enlightenment and us sort of forging our own path and sort of taking from different traditions and things like that. Because that is ideally what you should be doing when you are on the path to enlightenment. And then came the solemn, inspirational locker room exhortation. The work of psychedelic scholar politicians described in this history is over. With love and confidence, we turn our work and our planet over to the young and their prophets, the rock and rollers. The 1968 edition celebrated 19 rock groups, the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, the Monkees, etc. A bit surprised that the jam rock band Grateful Dead isn't really mentioned here. But I heard about something through, again, Illuminostic about the acid tests. Apparently, Grateful Dead didn't really like Leary for whatever reason. So maybe there's some bad blood, and that's why he is not mentioned here. Okay, these pronouncements were breathless, pious, embarrassing, grandiose, but they did lurch in the right direction. The inevitable future, the 60s youth movement did change human culture. It did, among other things, popularize, legitimize this astonishing concept of new generation as a major cultural issue globally. Generationalismo, what the fuck that was. Oh my God. It's hard for us to realize that the concept that each generation of teenagers recreates a new culture was not a major historical force before the 20th century. For example, in the slow-witted 1975 edition of the New Columbia Encyclopedia, the only reference to the explosive word refers to the generation of 1898 in Spain. The gay 90s bohemians were not teenagers. Okay, so this is around the time that Crowley came to the picture, I guess. The occult revival was in full swing. My charming, elegant, educated, worldly Irish Catholic grandparents, Sarah Rooney and Dennis Leary, did not imagine that they belonged to a generation. Dutiful Catholic teenagers of the Victorian age, 1860, 1890, danced, dressed, courted the way their parents and their Protestants did. Polkas and waltzes. And their coming-of-age trips were not to Woodstock or Kathmandu. Like the Protestants they read about in the papers, they dutifully sailed to Europe on the traditional Cunard steamships and made the classical obligatory trips to the Louvre, the Vatican museums, and opera houses. Okay, yeah, so pilgrimages are different when you sort of get into spirituality and things like that. Like, for example, I've sort of made pilgrimage to places like, Ecuador as my first destination, and Peru, where it's Ecuador being the first place I ever drank ayahuasca, and I had the privilege of drinking with an uncontacted woman, and she had a lot of practices that were untouched by Western influence and New Age bullshittery and that kind of thing, and that was fantastic. And boy, she was fit. Even at the age of 75, she was incredibly dexterous, walking across the weird fucking bridges that even all of us young blokes were like, oh, it's fucking great. I missed Ecuador, and I also went to Peru, went to like the Temple of the Sun, and went in and around to the Sacred Valley, that kind of thing. So pilgrimages are important because that's sort of what everyone sort of does. So like, obviously for these Protestants, it was, to Europe. For Muslims, it's like Mecca and that kind of thing. For acid heads, it's probably the Grateful Dead. And for people like myself, it was South America. I do intend to go again at some point, assuming I have the money. Now let's begin. The lost generation of the 20s. Just recently, I learned that my sophisticated Aunt Betty died in 1923 of a cocaine overdose. Betty and her scandalous trips to Paris, New York, and Reno for a semi-legal divorce was a hell-raising, whoopee, sophisticated flapper, a dutiful member of the roaring 20s counterculture, the lost generation. Interesting, because I'm pretty certain Gen Z is now sort of regarded as the lost generation. That's sort of the same time where a lot of things such as World War I happened. There was also depression and prohibition and all other kind of thing. And right now, we're in the middle of a weird crisis of purpose once again. Yet, it's just different this time, but because we've got all other kinds of things with us now, such as the internet, which is not great for us. Okay. This catchy term was invented by a certain Gertrude Stein, an astute, brave, scientifically trained sister who flaunted lesbian credentials and courageously glorified the concept of counterculture. My darling, beloved parents, Abigail and Timothy, were part of this new culture. These pious, prudish, patriotic, middle-class Catholics openly swigged the major illegal drug of the time, and they smoked cigarettes, not in public, for ladies, of course. Abby and Tote belonged to the first cohort to understand generational differences. They called it progress, i.e. Model T Ford's canned goods lipstick. Sounds like we've been here before. Instead of our Model T Fords fucking Teslas. Don't like them. And this isn't about like Elon Musk character. Like, Teslas are massive pieces of shit cars. Don't fucking buy them. My parents silently knew they were different from their parents. They were first generation in human history to listen to radio and talk via electric wires. They smoked and drank like the film stars. Their radio broadcasters were lectures or symphony concerts. They were teens too soon to be imprinted by Decca Records playing jazz and Dixieland. Television? No way. My parents stubbornly rejected television like suspicious primitives. The way literary people today fear computers. Are you guys listening to this? Doesn't matter what generation we're a part of. There's all kinds of new fears with new things. For us, it's the big move with AI and smartphones and things like that. Every generation has different kinds of things. It's sort of generational politics is, there you go again. Been around since for fucking ever. It is interesting to recall that those magic terms, Bohemians and Lost Generation, were applied to upper middle class adults. F. Scott Fitzgerald, Ernest Hemingway, Ezra Pound, Mabel Dodge, D.H. Lawrence, T.S. Eliot, James Joyce, William Butler Yeats, Ford Madox Ford, Georgia O'Keeffe, the Expressionist painters, the jazz musicians, none of these avant-garde cultural innovators were teenagers. So, Generation 1, the Spock parents. For example, the psychedelic experiences described in High Priest were organized and made credible by people who teened in 1920, 1940. I think it's referring to, obviously, people who engaged in new sort of culture and later on in their life. So, yeah, people like Aldous Huxley, as we're about to get to. The quaint scholarly attitude of this book emerges from sages like Walter Clark, Frank Barron, Aldous and Laura Huxley, Gordon Wasson, Arthur Koester, Allen Ginsberg, Harry Murray, Houston Smith, Sri Gayatri Devi, Alan Watts, William S. Burroughs, and me. In 1960, we middle-aged, middle-class, naive, white Harvard faculty intellectuals expected that psychedelic drugs would be used by academic scholarly adults who read William James' variety of religious experience and the pop Hindu and pop Buddhist texts. Our mission was to train graduate students to... intermission, people? Use psychedelic drugs as tools for research, psychotherapy, and mystical experiences. It never occurred to us that a new post-war generation who grew up with television who would use psychedelics as a rite of passage. Turn on, fine-tune, off, on, drop out. It sounds very different from what we usually hear, like tune in, drop out, take control. So, well, sort of the same thing, but it's a bit worded a bit differently there. We indulgent parents unwittingly produced baby boomers. The Woodstock generation shocked and scorned us square parents. Then, in turn, the hippies grew up and produced children. The skeptical yuppies. So yeah, all the other ones. Gen 3, the skeptical yuppies. And these disco punkers of the cocaine 70s and the booze crack 80s grew up scorning their hippie dippy parents. Interesting. So, you know how, like, countercultures always tend to exist? Even something such as consciousness expansion may sometimes be completely detested by their progeny, which is interesting to hear. Or maybe that they didn't really know what they were doing and they were trying to act like sages, because we all know we have a few of those people who take psychedelics and they act like sages of the universe, and they sound, quite frankly, fucking ridiculous. Gen 4, the super skeptical screen-age net surfers. Today, with wary anticipation, we watch this mysterious informatic new breed in front of computer screens, feeding neuro-enriched light waves to their hungry brains, fine-tuning, scanning, melding, morphing technicolored screen images linked into the internet, exchanging new light-speed realities. May we humbly hope that they will upload a few shards or fragments of these archaeological high priest chips and around 10 other storybooks by the author of the world on the World Wide Web. Hey, would you look at that? It's talking about me. Yep, so there you go, on the World Wide Web, right here, right now, talking about it. I don't know if you could call that synchronicity, but I guess you could. Because I didn't really intend to start talking about this. And to friends, Rosemary Leary. This big list of people. Give you guys a bit of a gander at it. All right. forward by Allen Ginsberg. Okay. I'm going to read some of these because I sometimes think they're quite important with everything that is going in between everything. So we'll start with this one. By the late 40s of this memory century, the people I knew best and loved most had already broken through the crust of old reason. I just want to double check that everything's right. Yes, it is. The crust of old reason and were dowsing for some supreme reality. Christmas on earth, Rimbaud said, second religiousness according to Spengler's outline of civilization, declining through proliferation of non-human, therefore boring technology. Blake had called O Earth, return. Centuries before, echoing the ancient Gnostic prophecy that Whitman spelled out for America, specifically demanding that the steam engine be confronted and met by at least an equally subtle and tremendous force in fusion for purposes of spiritualization. For the pure conscious, for genuine aesthetics, and for absolute and primal manliness and womanliness, Ezra's pound mind jumped to diagnose the dimming of the world's third eye. With Usura, the line grows thick. Interesting. So basically, there's this potentiality that industrialization is in fact removing us a lot more from the spiritual realm. I think that's sort of what it was talking about. So we actually should meet this hyper-materialistic sort of paradigm that we sort of brought ourselves in, and counterbalance it with spirituality and enlightenment and that kind of thing. Because it's been shown that making the goal and to be whoever has the most money wins, and to essentially make money God has been the most terrible and unfortunate thing that's happened to modern man. All right. One scholar who transmitted Blake's Kabbalah, we're talking about Kabbalah now, S. Foster Damon, could remember his sudden vision of tiny flowers carpeting Harvard Yard before World War I, an image that lingered over 60 years in mind since his fellow student Virgil Thompson gave him the cactus peyote to eat. There you go. Damon concluded the rare beings like Blake are born with physiologic gift of vision, continuous or intermittent. William James, whose pragmatic magic probably called the peyote god to Harvard in the first place, had included shamanistic chemical visions among the many authentic varieties of religious experience. His student, Gertrude Stein, experimented in alteration of consciousness through mindfulness of language and extremely effective yoga since mechanical reproduction of language. By the 20th century, had made language the dominant vehicle of civilized consciousness. That is the 20th century, yep. Consciousness by her companion Alice B. Toklas contributed to a cookbook recipe for hashish brownies to enlighten those persons over talkative in drawing rooms unaware that the medium is the message. Interesting, because when we talk about medium as the message, like the message that people obviously get through psychedelic substances has to be done through that more or less. And why it's sort of important that a lot of the rituals in like the Amazon jungle and things like that, possibly, and I would also have to guess also initiations are usually done with alongside psychoactive substances. It doesn't always have to be psychedelic. It could be things like tobacco, amongst other things. And you get the idea. Let's continue. The synchronism is exquisite. William S. Burroughs, also once of Harvard, shared Miss Stein's mindfulness of the hypnotic drug-like power of language. There you go. Propaganda, anyone? And collaborated on cut-up rearrangement of stereotyped language forms with a friend, Brian Geeson, who had originally given Miss Toklas the recipe of her famous brownies. Hash brownies. Never again. Burroughs, among others, had begun experiments with drug shamanism after World War II for author of Naked Lunch. It was a pragmatic extension of his Cambridge interest in linguistic anthropology. The same Gnostic impulse broke through the clear consciousness simultaneously in many American cities. Gary Snyder realized the entire universe was alive one daybreak in 1948 in Portland when a flight of birds rose out of the stillness in a gully by the city river. A natural vision. The masters of the Berkeley Renaissance read Gertrude Stein aloud and practiced poetic Kabbalah. Charming syncretism that psychologist Timothy Leary met poets Jack Spicer and Robert Duncan in that same 1948 student scene. Neil Cassidy drove Jack Kerouac to Mexico in a prophetic automobile to see the physical body of America. The same Denver Cassidy that one decade later drove Ken Kesey's Cosmos Patton school bus on a Kafka circus over the roads of the awakening nation. And that awakening began, some say, with the first saxophone cry of the new mode of black music which shook the walls of White City mind when Charles Parker lifted his bird flight noted horn and announced a new rhythm of thinking and extended breathing of the body in music and speech, a new consciousness. For as Plato had writ, when the mode of music changes, the walls of the city shake. There you go. So it's talking about resonance, or something along those lines, or changing the basically when there's a dissonance, it begins to shake the foundations. So speech is also the same sort of thing. Books are the same sort of medium. Obviously not vibrational, but it's sort of the same sort of view. All the same. The new consciousness born in these states can be traced back through old Gnostic texts, visions, artists, and shamans. See? It's through everywhere. It's everywhere. The whole idea of the sinusoidal wave, speech, and music causing change. It is the consciousness of our ground nature suppressed and desecrated. It was always the secret tale of the tribe in America, this great scandal of the closing of the doors of perception of the naked human form divine. It began with the white murder of Indian inhabitants of the ground, the theft and later usurious exploitation of their land, continued with an assault on all races and species of Mother Nature herself, and concludes today with total disruption of the ecology of the entire planet. No wonder black slaves kept for non-human use in this century in tear gas ghettos of megalopolis were the first aliens to sound the horn of change. The first strangers to call the great call through Basilide's many heavens. Amazing synchronism again, that Mr. Frank takes gun, Native American church Amerindian peyote chief, invited the brilliantly talkative silver-haired psychiatrist who directed a Saskatchewan mental hospital in the 1940s to participate in a peyote ritual. And the same Dr. Humphrey Osmond, having recognized the wonder of consciousness, thus experienced pass on the catalyst in mescaline, since this is formed to Aldous Huxley, and that Huxley's 1940 essay on the chemical opening doors of perception found its way to the table of Bickford's cafeteria, Times Square in New York, and the couches of Reed College and Berkeley, where artist persons had heard the great call of the African American, already initiated themselves en masse to subtle gradations of their own consciousness experienced while smoking the same African hemp smoked by Charles Parker Thelonious Monk and Dizzy. Sorry, that name's kind of funny. And Dizzy Gillespie. Not to be confused with Dizzy Rascal, anyone. Dr. Timothy Leary takes up his part of the tale of the tribe in a Mexican hut and brings his discovery to Harvard harmoniously. And there begins the political battle. Black and white magic become public, visible for a generation. Interesting. Think about that for a second. So what's sort of happened is apparently we managed to see black magic and the like for the first time in a very long time. Fuck my voice, mate. Dr. Leary is a hero of American consciousness. He began as a sophisticated academician. He encountered discoveries in his field which confounded him and his own technology. He pursued his studies where attention commanded. He arrived beyond the boundaries of public knowledge. One might hesitate to say, like Socrates, like Galileo. Poor Dr. Leary, poor Earth. Yet here we are in science fiction history in the age of hydrogen bomb apocalypse, the very Kali Yuga, wherein man's stupidity so overwhelms the planet that ecological catastrophe begins to rehearse old tribes' tales of karmic retribution, fire and flood and Armageddon impeding. So there you go. We've actually come a little bit with the full circle thing in regards to what happens when we actually don't regard nature, and like man's arrogance is sort of what's causing a lot of these problems to happen. Okay, let's continue. It would be natural, in fact, deja vu, that the very technology stereotyping our consciousness and desensitizing our perceptions should throw up in its own antidote synthetics such as LSD synchronous with mythical tribal soma and peyote. Given such historic comedy, who could emerge from Harvard technology, but one and only Dr. Leary, a respectable human being, a worldly man faced with the task of Messiah, inevitable. Yo, what's going on, Illuminostic? Good to see that you're watching and giving me some support. And I'm sure you love hearing about Dr. Leary as well. I'm sure you love it. Okay. Not merely because the whole field of mental psychology, as a science has arrived at biochemistry anyway, it was inevitable because the whole professional civilized world, like Dr. Leary, was already faced. It sounds like Crowley when he talks about himself. Oh, no. I don't think Leary's eating his own cum or doing other kinds of sick shit, though. Let's just put it that way. So Doctor was already faced with the Messiah task was already faced with the Messiah conscious revolution, including an alteration of human consciousness leading to the immediate mutation of social and economic reforms. In economic forms, I guess. The staggering realization, psychedelic, i.e. conscious expanding and mind manifesting in itself, without the use of chemical catalysts, was then forced on all of us by image of our own unconscious risings from the streets of Chicago, where tear gas was dumped on Christ's very cross in Lincoln Park, AD 1968. The drains are backing up in the cities. Smog, noise, and physiologic poison in food turns us to insect acts. Overpopulation crazes the planet. Our lakes corrupt. Old riverways become dark fens. Tanks entered Prague and Chicago streets simultaneously. Police state arrive in every major city. Starvation wastes African provinces. Chinese genocide in Tibet mirrored American genocide in Vietnam. Alarm, alarm, house deep as any biblical prophecy. So I guess that's talking about the idea of the apocalypse, because apocalypse means revelation, but usually when we think of apocalypse, that's usually when a lot of horrible shit seems to occur. And I think it's the same sort of thing what happened in the 1960s, where there was a psychedelic revolution and there was a lot of different sort of views coming about, especially in regards to like psychedelics and enlightenment and things like that. And it's all the same thing happening now that we see. Hermetic knowledge becoming more and more common, but I don't know. I still think we have a long way to go when you talk to some of the profane in everyday life. Old English, apocalypse, and via Old English and Ecclesial Latin from Greek, apoxa, uncover, reveal, from apocalyptum to cover. Oh, okay. Yeah. So yeah, cover, uncover, same different things. And I guess usually you see what's going on underneath it is the sort of result when things get revealed in broad daylight in that sense. Ourselves caught in the giant machine are conditioned to its terms. Oh, fuck. Ain't that the truth? Only holy vision or technological catastrophe or revolution break the mind-forged manacles. So yeah, technological revolution, absolutely. That is breaking the mind-forged manacles because we have more access to this stuff more than ever. And that's sort of one of the major tools. It's probably just as important as entheogens, if not more important, because now everyone's exposed to all kinds of different viewpoints. Given one byproduct of the technology that might, as it were by feedback, correct the berserk machine and liberate the inventors' minds for captivity by hypnotic robots, Dr. Leary had in LSD an invaluable civilized elixir. For as Dr. Jiří Rubíšek observed early in Prague, artificial psychosis in 1958, LSD inhibits conditioned reflexes, and this single phrase for rational man might be the key to the whole Gnostic mystery of LSD and Dr. Leary's role as unique, a la solitary, courageous, humane, and frank democratic bodhisattva teacher of the uses of LSD in America. I think I remember seeing like Leary sort of have a sort of weird Buddhist get up at some point in regards to LSD. For he took on himself the noble task of announcing the evidence of his senses, despite the scary contumely of fellow academians, the dispraising timorous irony of scientific professionals, the stupidity, meanness, self-serving cowardice, and hollow vanity of bureaucratic personnel from Harvard Yard to Mexico City to Washington. From the violent mouth burglar prosecutor G. Gordon Liddy works with the ignorant sheriff office in Dutchess County, New York, to the inner greedy sanctums of the U.S. Treasury Department in D.C., a whole establishment of civilization that defends us from knowledge of our own unconscious by means of policemen's clubs and will resist the liberation of our minds embodied by any brutish means available, including tear gas, napalm, and the hydrogen bomb. That's a bit of a black pill if I've ever heard one myself. So yeah, all this police state and all this other kind of stuff, it's not for your own fucking good. It's for damn sure. Anyway, let's continue. Dr. Leary conducted himself fairly and equitably given the extremity of his knowledge. It took an innocent courage to explore his own unconditioned consciousness. And yeah, sure, it absolutely does. To take LSD and other chemicals often enough to balance praxis as well as explanation, and to attempt to wear the enormity of his experience of reason. An heroic attempt to communicate clearly and openly through civilized technological media to his fellow citizens, despite centuries of identity brainwash accelerated now and mass paranoia and Cold War apocalypse, required of Dr. Leary to the proverbial wisdom of serpent and harmlessness of dove. So yeah, duality, you need both severity and mercy. You can't have one without the other because one's cruelty. So severity by itself is cruelty. Mercy by itself is weakness. How much longer have we got for this opening? Because I might want to wrap it up once I've just done the forward, and I'll continue a bit later, maybe. Timothy Leary tells the tale of his tribe in book aptly titled The Politics of Ecstasy, and events enlarged since he wrote his book and chose its title charge the author's handiwork with prophetic enormity. The battle of generations that erupted in 1968 simultaneously in Prague, Chicago, Mexico City, Paris, New York, and Moscow underground. Everywhere the state's electronic consciousness was interlinked. Transcended antique battles of Cold War and race. We witnessed planetary confrontation wherein controlling elders trapped in a suicidal mechanical consciousness deployed their destructive technology against their own children in the streets of their own cities. 'Tis Blake's Urizen tormenting tender loss in eternity. New generations have risen spontaneous with new consciousness and a mutant politics of flower power that is rooted in the ground of human consciousness itself, an acceptance of human identity as one with green living nature on a living planet where all creatures are a living God. The public philosophies and technologies of all civilized governments at present are at war with this God, and the planet itself is within decades of destruction. No wonder there was sudden appearance of Adamic hair. Eve walked naked in the streets. Ancient body rhythms beat out through the airwaves in electric, mantric rock from Bratislava to San Francisco, and use ingested shamanic elixirs to recover consciousness of planetary archetypes. Man, yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. So he's basically just talking about things like the idea of recovering one's own archetype, one's ingenium. This could, I think, obviously there's like 12 main archetypes if you go by the zodiac, but I think there's like, if you then look at, there must be probably a few hundred, if not thousands, of subtypes, because like the Goetia is sort of a reflection of this, as if you go by 777 correspondences, each Goetic, there's 6 Goetia demons per zodiac, which makes 72. But yeah, digressing a little bit. Let's continue. One political synchronism that concerns this text should be gossiped for contextual. Timothy Leary quit public life to write a book in Mexico some years ago, but he was searched by agents of government as he went across borders. Arrested for possession of some herb, and thus forced to interrupt his writing, return to public action and defend his person by attack by the state. So he traveled to I gotta slow myself down, man. So he traveled to academies and lectured to the young, and thus he paid large legal fees required by the state and thus maintained an ashram of fellow seekers well known in Millbrook. Agents of government then raided and repeatedly abused the Millbrook utopia, whereupon Dr. Leary was obliged to be Dr. Leary and lecture more to raise money for his family of imprisoned friends. Agents of government concluded this phase of prosecution with a piece of Socratic irony. So blatantly echoing an old Greek injustice that the vulgar rhetoric of a tyrannous state would need only to be quoted to be recognized. Were it not for the fact that the states were then so plagued with tyrannously inspired chaos and public communication so flooded with images of state atrocity from the alleys of Saigon to the parks of Chicago, that official public conscience here now, as memorably in Russia and Germany, was shocked, dumbed, and amnestic. I quote from spring 1968 state document, in any case of the delectation of Gnostic cognoscenti. Say that right? Whatever. That is to say, myriads of the present young. To honorable, you can say that. Clerk U.S. Court Appeals for the Fifth Circuit, room 48400 New Orleans, Timothy Leary versus United States of America. So yeah, for people who don't know, Leary was set up with some herb in his car to get in prison and that kind of thing, but he managed to get himself out. So I think this is obviously something from his case. We are applying for an order from the district court requiring the defendant to surrender to United States Marshal. The appellant continues his publicized activities involving the advocacy of the use of psychedelic drugs by students and others of immature judgment and tender years is regarded as a menace to the community so long as he is at large. Damn, man, that actually sounds so much like, the trial of Socrates. Basically, it's the United States saying that Timothy Leary is corrupting the youth. The fact that they're basically doing the exact same thing that happened to Socrates makes me want to read Leary so much more now. It's the same thing. Dr. Timothy Leary is corrupting the youth. How dare he? He needs to be imprisoned. Socrates is corrupting the youth. He needs to be stopped. Well, we don't like it, so we'll kill him by hemlock. So, yeah, that's definitely something. That's definitely something. Maybe I'll become like Socrates someday. Hopefully it doesn't involve me needing to drink hemlock and kill myself, but you get the idea. All right. Very truly yours, Morton L. Sussman, United States Attorney. Thus requesting revocation of Dr. Leary's bailed liberty while his political religious defense for possession of an herb approached Supreme Court. Agents of government checked further conversation with the young. The Millbrook ashram had been simultaneously dispersed by agents of government. His immediate financial responsibilities lightened. Timothy Leary retired back home to Berkeley with his mate and completed his description of the politics of ecstasy. Sort of interesting that he's talking about politics of ecstasy because I was just thinking about the other day how forms of meaningful revelry are basically completely gone in a lot of our world. And I don't mean the general revelry of like breads and circuses. I'm talking about something that's a little bit more holistic. Like Grateful Dead concert is like a sort of example of more holistic revelry, or writing and dancing and that kind of thing. It could be orgies too, if that's what you're into. But I think the point that's been made is that I'm sort of digressing on, is that we should be working hard, but do not forget revelry, and make sure that all your pleasure-seeking activities are in line with your purpose. Make sure that the said pleasure you seek and your recreation and your leisure is still in some way related to your purpose. Let's continue. A twin book, High Priest, was also finished in 1968. In High Priest, Dr. Leary composed letters, anecdotes, conversations, and personal letters together in a number... I lost my place. In a number of chapters concerning friends and colleagues in worlds of science and art, and presented his history of consciousness-altering drug fate in the course of a decade's official and unofficial experiments from Mexico through Harvard through Millbrook. His prose by now more supple than before, the book's collage structure contains generous exegesis of the person and events of a psychedelic brotherhood and scientific confreries that altered the consciousness of that American decade. Next year, his legal appeal reached the Supreme Court. In May 1969, the law under which he was arrested was ruled unconstitutional. Damn. The government attack on his person continued, and Dr. Leary was arrested and subsequently tried, convicted, and sentenced to 10 years without appeal bail by Judge Byron McMillan of Orange County for possession of 2 marijuana cigarette stubs planted in his car ashtray by a California policeman. You know, what the fuck? Like, someone as intelligent as Leary, he would not leave 2 fucking marijuana cigarette stubs in the ashtray. Fucking ashtray. Like, he's not that dumb. To retry Dr. Federal authorities chose to retry Dr. Leary on his Laredo arrest on another technicality, this time not for failure to report natural grass for government tax, but on charge of transporting a smidgen of marijuana that few hundred yards from the middle of the international bridge to the customs shed where he had been detained years earlier. Most dangerous man in the world. Damn. I think that's what the rulers in Greece probably thought about Socrates. Seems to be the case when you raise anyone's consciousness, it's sort of met with hostility, especially from the people higher up. Convicted in a Texas trial, our philosopher was sentenced by Judge Ben Connolly to 10 years also. Both sentences set consecutively, bail denied. Dr. Leary, at time of this writing, was jailed in California from February 1970. Terminology of both judges agree with government lawyers. Boorish language that Dr. Leary was a menace to the community. Again, the whole fucking corrupting the youth, dangerous to society. Like, where have we heard that before? Now, it's not to say this doesn't happen with stuff that is legitimately dangerous to communities, right? But that same rhetoric can be used against things that actually can help communities. So always be aware of that, because anything that tends to threaten status quo, generally you can say it's going to be a menace to a community or whatever. And in a sense, they're kind of right, because what ends up happening is it'll ensue chaos for a little bit. Okay. Bail denials was successfully appealed in the Texas case, and as of August 7, 1970, bail was perhaps to be granted by some Supreme Court for California, despite United States attorneys obnoxious plea that a philosopher represents a danger to other persons and to the community. I've gone over that. The text of United States of America appeals, opposition to application for bail pending appeal, contained the following hideous paragraph. Attached hereto as Exhibit D1 is a copy of an article purportedly authored by Timothy Leary in Playboy magazine, in which he discusses the facts given rise to the case at bar, and which bears also upon his aims and activities which are at the basis of government opposition to his release and bail. Further documents appended include Dr. Leary's pacifist testimony at the celebrated Chicago conspiracy trial, and news reporter of various university lectures, including one at Ann Arbor, Michigan, early 1971, whereabout Dr. Leary discussed to raise funds for legal appeals for the poet John Sinclair, also jailed for several decades and denied appeal after conviction for a year earlier for having been entrapped giving 2 joints to a local bearded agent who infiltrated his multiracial Detroit artist workshop. Another disgusting documented appended was a secret agent's report to Laguna Beach Police Department concerning additional suspects involved in the Brotherhood of Religious Love. Bill, good old Bill, makes an appearance. Refer to attached report for additional detail. Such a hex country. Judge McMillan labeled Leary an insidious and detrimental influence on society. Damn, man. You can't make this shit up. You just can't. And back then when, like, obviously psychedelics was still very new, and it was kind of new. Of course, they had to squash it out as soon as possible, but can't really say, oh, psychedelics are bad now, because it's now in the public consciousness that they're actually quite useful and good for you. So, yeah. I'm not going to say anything out loud because I'm just as afraid of the fucking YouTube algorithm as well. Anyway, so yeah, let's continue. Insidious and detrimental influence on society. Quote, LA Times, February 20, 1970, and a pleasure-seeking, irresponsible medicine advocate for the free use of LSD. Quote, Long Beach Press, March 17, same year. Suffering armfuls cheerfully, Dr. Leary made an exquisite religious covenant in jail. Huh, interesting. I want to hear about this. Imprinting as ontological keys suggested and re-imprinting via biological mouth intake. Food chemistry is proposed as proper philosophic action. Hardly an affair of state were only passed to no state in theory. Leary's jail texts economically define the use and role of LSD. His formal psychological discussion of character alteration by means of insight-creating drugs, such discussion related to Socrates' discussion at deathbed and texts on Catholic hell punishment. These juxtaposed with judiciary reality of jail society, all accomplished in professional manner with saintly aplomb. Damn, I'm feeling a bit gassed after this first thing, so I might just read the forward and call it a day after I'm done with this one. I want to make sure I get to the end, though. Don't think we have much left to go. I don't think so. What's going on in his head? Day-to-day observation of heavy metal fix, the inside facts of jail, compassionate, shrewd analysis of Charles Manson as jail-conditioned soul, a few gists and piths, psychopharmacology plus biorhythmic sequential analysis, alchemy, and astrology. Dr. Leary's notes include disquisitions on hell from church fathers paralleled with prison weather, as if prison were that hell spoken of old incarnate now in minds of state judge and jailers. Thoughts interleaved with quotations from official rejection letters aren't mailed through jail walls. Dr. Leary touched a few political nerves. J.E. Hoover, a 70-year-old bachelor virgin, actually Sir Tim and anyone Hoover, an ear voyeur, has taped of ML King tapes of a wild party. King was afraid Hoover do something foolish and play it in public. Oh dear. He did. To newsmen and various lawmakers and wired service folk, no one's interested in this old queen's tile blackmail, invasion of privacy anyway. God. Back then, politicians are fucking petty and shitty and all other kinds of things. Unreal. Dr. Leary's jail notes make a science fiction classic all will come true. As Neil Cassidy also spent 2 years in San Quentin a decade earlier, entrapped by shifty narcotics agent for a joint. An answer to this tough problem of human aggression? Medicine, 3 lumps, hashish, daily diet, 75% of aggressiveness. This fact courtesy U.S. Arms Patrol disarmament experiments, Princeton, 1970. Dr. Leary was jailed for theory and practice of research on LSD and cannabis, a shameful harbor on the academics of America and on the state. His prophecies, like those of Hippocrates, he paraphrases, and his techniques with potions, if become widespread, will totally free each individual from state control and make possible complete liberty of consciousness. Yep. So, the elixirs of life, the fountain of youth. I think the fountain of youth, by the way, while that passes my mind, it's got nothing to do with it literally being a literal fountain of youth. Maybe there is when we're talking about the alchemical elixir or the philosopher's stone. But I think for this purpose, what would usually be referred to as the fountain of youth would be something like ayahuasca, because what it's doing is it's making the unconscious conscious, and it's basically bringing in the original unity that you once had as a child. That's the main difference. When you have that original unity, that's essentially the fountain of youth, in a sense. So to be young is to be unified. To be dead and divided is to die. A country that's divided shall not stand. And that is got something to do with cancer as well, because it's somehow like it's dividing, like there's an over division of cells or something like that. I'll have to look it up, but that's for another day. Someone's revving a motorbike outside. I'm not sure if you can hear that. Dr. Leary had taken the burden of giving honest report of LSD and cannabis in terms of more accurate and harmless than the fake science of the government party hacks, and therefore his imprisonment was an act of insult to science, liberty, common sense, freedom, academy, medicine, psychology as an art, and poetry as a tradition of human mind vision. Well, jailed honed him down to rib and soul. Oh no, that's not good. Bail was not granted. Dr. Leary left San Luis jail months ago on his own initiative. Richard Alpert. Like in some of the mystic sort of lines there. Reintroduction. Okay. I'm actually probably going to call it there. Thank you for anyone who decided to tune in. I found that forward quite entertaining and interesting, especially the whole part of him seemingly having a lot of similarities with Socrates, in the sense that he was tried the same way. I was like, oh, you're corrupting the youth, you're a danger to the community, you're a danger to society, and all other kinds of shit. Damn. I mean, you must be an absolute piece of shit if you really think someone trying to free someone's mind is a danger to you. Just, it's not cool. Anyway, thank you so much, guys, for tuning in to my first live stream. I hope you enjoyed it. I will try to find different ways to make it a bit more fun and a bit more engaging. And I've sort of noticed that my voice, since I don't work it that much, is actually taking a bit of a toll, but it's probably good. And hopefully it's helping with my oration, because I also noticed that I was tripping up on my speech a little bit. And maybe if I actually train that a little bit, I'll actually have more clear thoughts, because I've had a past of very scattered brain and that kind of thing. That's probably sort of manifesting in the way I speak as well, because I also had a stutter growing up. All right. Anyways, see you guys later. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the Yours Truly Baphomet YouTube channel. And I'll see